The rhythmic hum of the quantum drive filled the observation deck of Research Station Helios as Dr. Nathaniel Wade pressed his forehead against the reinforced glass, watching the swirling auroras of planet Kepler 186f below. After 6 months aboard the station, he still couldn't get used to the way the planet's magnetic field painted the atmosphere in impossible shades of emerald and gold. The station's AI chimed softly. "Dr. Wade, your presence is requested in Lab 7. The Arcturus delegation has arrived." Nathaniel straightened his wrinkled research uniform, wondering why the alien scientists had chosen to arrive during the station's night cycle. The Arcturus were known for their rigid adherence to protocol. Showing up unannounced was distinctly out of character. The corridors of Helios were eerily quiet as he made his way to the xenobiology wing. His footsteps echoed against metal floors, each step a reminder of how far he was from Earth. At 32, he was the youngest lead researcher on the joint human-alien mission studying Kepler 186f's unique biosystems. Most of his colleagues had decades more experience, but none shared his unconventional theories about cross-species genetic compatibility. The lab doors slid open with a soft hiss. Inside stood 3 Arcturus scientists, their iridescent scales shifting colors in the harsh laboratory lights. But it was the 4th figure that caught Nathaniel's attention, an Arcturus unlike any he'd seen before. She stood apart from the others, her scales a deep midnight blue rather than the typical silver. Where most Arcturus moved with calculated precision, she seemed to float, her movements almost musical. When she turned to face him, Nathaniel felt his breath catch. Her eyes were the color of distant stars. "Dr. Wade," she said, her translator rendering her words in perfect English despite the slight melodic accent. "I am Research Director Thura Ven. Your work on cross-species genetic markers has intrigued us." The way she said "intrigued" made it clear that the Arcturus Scientific Council had probably used far less flattering terms. His research wasn't exactly popular with the conservatives in either species. "Director Ven," Nathaniel replied, trying to maintain his professional composure despite his fascination. "I wasn't expecting a personal visit from the Arcturus Institute. The unexpected often yields the most interesting results, doesn't it?" There was something in her voice, amusement? Challenge? The translator couldn't quite capture the nuance. The other Arcturus scientists shifted uncomfortably, their scales flickering with patterns that Nathaniel recognized as disapproval. Clearly, Director Ven's informal approach wasn't standard protocol. "My latest findings suggest that certain genetic sequences in human DNA have remarkable similarities to Arcturus cellular structures," Nathaniel explained, pulling up his research data on the lab's holographic display. "It's as if our species were." Drawing from the same source code, Thura finished his sentence, moving closer to examine the floating strands of DNA. Her presence beside him sent an unexpected shiver down his spine. "Yes, I've had similar theories. Though expressing them on Arcturus Prime would be politically unwise." The other scientists spoke rapidly in their native tongue, their tone clearly agitated. Thura responded with what sounded like a polite dismissal, and they reluctantly left the lab. "You'll have to forgive my colleagues," she said once they were alone. "The idea that humans and Arcturus might share common genetic ancestors challenges thousands of years of our biological doctrine. Change comes slowly to my people." "I'm familiar with resistance to new ideas," Nathaniel replied, thinking of the skepticism his research had faced on Earth. "But the evidence is becoming harder to ignore. These similarities couldn't have occurred by chance." Thura's scales rippled with a pattern he'd never seen before, something between curiosity and excitement. "Perhaps that's why I'm here, Dr. Wade. Some of us believe it's time for a more direct collaboration between our species." She moved to the lab's observation window, gazing out at the swirling auroras below. "Beautiful, isn't it? My people see such displays as omens. Tonight's patterns speak of change, of boundaries crossed." Nathaniel joined her at the window, acutely aware of her presence. And what do you believe they mean? She turned to face him, her star-bright eyes meeting his. I believe they mean we're standing on the edge of something revolutionary, Dr. Wade. The question is, are you prepared for where this research might lead us? The way she said it made him wonder if she was talking about more than just their scientific work. There was an intensity in her gaze that transcended professional curiosity, a connection that defied the supposed gap between their species. Call me Nathaniel, he said softly, making a decision that would change both their worlds. And yes, I'm prepared to follow this research wherever it leads. Thurah's scales shimmered with an iridescent pattern he would later learn meant joy. Then let us begin, Nathaniel. There are mysteries in our stars waiting to be understood, by both our peoples. As they turned back to their work, the auroras outside painted the lab in shifting colors, nature itself seeming to celebrate this unexpected partnership. Neither of them could have known then how their collaboration would challenge not just scientific doctrine, but the very foundations of how their species saw themselves and each other. And as the night cycle wore on, they found themselves drawing closer, sharing theories and ideas with an ease that defied their different origins. It was more than just scientific curiosity that kept them working long after the station's artificial day had begun. Something new was forming between them, something as unexpected as their genetic discoveries, a connection that would soon prove as revolutionary as their research. Weeks passed on Research Station Helios like streams of starlight, each day bringing Nathaniel and Thurah closer to breakthrough, and to each other. Their late-night research sessions had become the talk of the station, though few understood the true significance of their work. Or perhaps, the true nature of the energy building between them. Nathaniel stood in the station's hydroponics bay, watching Thurah examine an earth orchid with characteristic intensity. Her scales shifted through shades of azure as she traced the flower's delicate patterns, recording data on her quantum tablet. Even performing such a simple task, she moved with a grace that made his heart race. The genetic adaptability of Earth flora is remarkable, she said, her translator barely keeping up with her excitement. These organisms can teach us so much about biological compatibility across species. Speaking of compatibility, Nathaniel began, then hesitated as another researcher entered the bay. The human scientist gave them a suspicious glance before gathering his samples and leaving. Such looks had become more frequent lately. Thurah's scales darkened slightly, a sign of concern he'd learned to recognize. The council has been asking questions about our research. They're uncomfortable with how closely we've been working together. The Human Science Division isn't thrilled either, Nathaniel admitted, moving closer to examine her readings. Yesterday, Director Morrison suggested I was becoming too invested in Arcturus biological systems. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the tablet, sending an electric current through Nathaniel's body. Thurah's scales flickered with patterns he now recognized as surprise, and something deeper. There are those among my people, she said softly, who believe that too much contact with humans will contaminate us. They fear what your species represents: change, unpredictability, emotion. And what do you believe? Nathaniel asked, aware that they were no longer talking about just their research. Before she could answer, the station's alert system activated. Attention all personnel. Unusual energy readings detected in Lab 7. Security protocols engaged. They rushed to their lab, finding the door sealed and emergency containment fields active. Through the reinforced windows, they could see their latest genetic samples glowing with an impossible light. The cellular fusion experiment, Thurah breathed, her scales pulsing with excitement. It's working. Nathaniel quickly accessed the lab's systems, bringing up the real-time data. The human and Arcturus DNA sequences aren't just compatible, they're creating entirely new patterns. This proves our theory about shared origins. It proves more than that, Thurah said, her voice filled with wonder. It shows our species aren't just related, we're complementary. Made to. To what? Came a stern voice behind them. They turned to find Administrator Marcus Reed, his face tight with disapproval. Beside him stood High Counselor Vex of the Arcturus delegation, his silver scales rippling with barely contained anger. Director Venn, Vex said in clipped tones, the Council requires your immediate return to Arcturus Prime. This experiment exceeds your authorized research parameters. You can't shut this down, Nathaniel protested, stepping forward. We're on the verge of proving that humans and Arcturus share a common ancestry. This could revolutionize both our societies. That's precisely what concerns us, Dr. Wade, Reed replied coldly. Some revelations are too dangerous. Some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. Thuraw's scales flashed with a pattern Nathaniel had never seen before, defiance. With respect, Counselor, you're too late. The evidence is already here. She gestured to the glowing samples. Our species aren't meant to be separated by artificial barriers. We're meant to learn from each other, to grow together. You sound like you've been corrupted by human idealism, Vex sneered. Perhaps this assignment has allowed too much fraternization. The word hung in the air like a weapon. Nathaniel felt his fists clench, but Thuraw's gentle touch on his arm calmed him. Her scales had settled into a pattern of absolute certainty. If seeking truth is corruption, then perhaps we need more of it, she declared. I won't abandon this research. Or my partnership with Dr. Wade. Reed's face reddened. This isn't just about research anymore, is it? The way you two look at each other, it's inappropriate. Unnatural. What's unnatural, Nathaniel countered, finding strength in Thuraw's unwavering presence, is denying the evidence in front of us. Our peoples aren't meant to be strangers. Every discovery we've made points to a deeper connection, one that transcends our physical differences. The lab sensors beeped urgently, drawing their attention back to the experiment. The glow from the samples had intensified, creating patterns that mirrored the auroras visible through the station's windows. Beautiful, Thuraw whispered, her scales shimmering with joy. Like the universe itself is confirming what we've found. Vex made a harsh sound. You have 1 hour to collect your personal items, Director Venn. A transport is waiting. As the administrators left, Nathaniel turned to Thuraw, his heart pounding. They can't separate us. Not now. Not when we're so close to understanding. Understanding what? She asked, her star-bright eyes searching his face. Everything, he breathed. Why I haven't been able to think straight since the moment you arrived. Why every discovery we make together feels like coming home. Why the thought of you leaving. Thuraw's scales rippled with colors he'd never seen before, deep, passionate hues that spoke of feelings beyond translation. Then we'll have to make sure they don't separate us, she said firmly. Because I'm not ready to let go of our discoveries either. Any of them. They stood together in the glow of their experiment, two beings from different worlds who had found something unprecedented, not just in their research, but in each other. The auroras outside painted them in shifting lights, nature itself seeming to celebrate their quiet rebellion against the artificial boundaries between their peoples. And in that moment, both knew that whatever came next, there would be no going back. They had crossed a line, not just in their research, but in their hearts. The real question was, would their worlds be ready for what they had become? The hour they had been given was almost up, but Nathaniel and Thuraw worked frantically in Lab 7, racing to preserve their research before the authorities could shut them down. The glowing genetic samples still pulsed with otherworldly light, each beat like a countdown to their separation. Transfer complete, Thuraw announced, her scales flickering with nervous energy as she secured their data in an encrypted quantum crystal. Even if they terminate our project, they can't erase what we've discovered. Nathaniel watched her work, admiring how her movements remained precise even under pressure. But what good is the discovery if they won't let us continue? The Council will bury this research, and you'll be. A violent shudder ran through the station, cutting him off. Warning klaxons blared as the artificial gravity fluctuated. They grabbed the nearest support rails as equipment crashed around them. Warning, the station AI announced. Severe gravitational anomaly detected. All personnel report to emergency stations. Through the lab windows, they could see the auroras of Kepler 186f had transformed into a writhing maelstrom of color. The planet's magnetic field was going haywire, and the station was caught in its grip. "This is impossible," Nathaniel muttered, pulling up the sensor readings. "The planet's magnetic core is suddenly hyperactive, almost as if it's responding to something," Thera finished, her eyes wide. "Nathaniel, look at our samples." The genetic fusion experiment was pulsing in perfect synchronization with the planetary disturbance. The combined DNA strands were creating patterns that matched the chaos in the atmosphere below. "It's not just biological compatibility," Thera breathed, her scales shifting to colors of revelation. "Our species share quantum resonance patterns at the cellular level. We're literally in tune with each other, and with this planet." Another tremor rocked the station. Emergency bulkheads began sealing as structural integrity warnings flashed across screens. "The station's shields can't handle this level of magnetic interference," Nathaniel realized, checking the deteriorating readings. "We need to stabilize the field, or Helios will be torn apart." The lab doors burst open as Administrator Reed and Counselor Vex rushed in, along with a security team. "What have you done?" Vex demanded, his scales practically white with rage. "Your unauthorized experiment is threatening the entire station." "You don't understand," Thera countered, her voice steady despite the chaos. "This isn't a malfunction, it's proof. The planet itself is showing us what we've been trying to tell you. Our species aren't just genetically linked, we're part of something much bigger." Another violent shake sent equipment crashing. Warning lights bathed the lab in crimson as the station's structural integrity continued to fail. "We need to shut down all experiments immediately," Reed ordered. "Security, escort Director Venn to the transport vessel." "Wait." Nathaniel moved to stand between Thera and the security team. "The experiment isn't causing this, it's resonating with it. If we can modify the frequency of the genetic fusion, we might be able to stabilize the planetary field." "Absolutely not," Vex snapped. "This has gone far enough." But Thera was already moving, her hands dancing over the lab controls. "The DNA patterns, they're like a key. If we can match the harmonic frequency." Nathaniel joined her, their movements perfectly synchronized after months of working together. "Adjusting quantum stabilizers. If we can create a counter-resonance." "This is a direct order to stand down," Reed shouted, but his voice was drowned out by another station-wide tremor. Thera's scales blazed with determination as she made the final adjustments. "Now, Nathaniel." Together, they activated the modified sequence. The genetic samples flared with brilliant light, sending out waves of energy that rippled through the station. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in perfect stillness. Then, slowly, beautifully, the chaos outside began to calm. The violent auroras transformed into a gentle dance of light, and the station's warnings fell silent one by one. "Gravitational anomaly stabilizing," the AI announced. "Station structural integrity returning to normal parameters." Nathaniel and Thera stood in stunned silence, watching as their combined work saved not just the station, but perhaps opened the door to understanding something far greater about both their species. "Impossible," Vex whispered, his scales showing confusion for the first time. "No," Thera replied softly, her hand finding Nathaniel's. "Not impossible. Inevitable. Like all the forces that have brought us to this moment." Reed stared at their joined hands, then at the now peaceful display of lights outside the station. "What exactly are we dealing with here?" "The truth," Nathaniel answered, squeezing Thera's hand. "About why humans and Arcturus were drawn to this planet. About why our DNA shares such profound similarities. About why some of us feel connections that transcend species. We're not meant to be separate, Thera added, her scales shimmering with emotion. This crisis proved it. Only by working together, by accepting our deep connection, could we prevent disaster. The security team shifted uncomfortably, looking to their superiors for direction. But both Reed and Vex seemed at a loss for words, their carefully maintained worldviews shaken by what they'd witnessed. The transport can wait, Vex finally said, his scales showing reluctant acceptance. Perhaps we need to reconsider our position on this research. And on other matters? Thera asked boldly, her grip on Nathaniel's hand tightening. The counselor's scales rippled with what might have been the faintest hint of amusement. One revelation at a time, Director Venn. One revelation at a time. As the officials filed out of the lab, Nathaniel and Thera turned to watch the newly calmed auroras paint the sky in gentle waves of light. Their joined hands felt like another kind of experiment, one that was proving just as revolutionary as their research. You know, this is just the beginning, Nathaniel said softly. Once they accept what we've discovered, everything will change. Thera's scales shifted to that special pattern he'd come to recognize, the one that meant joy mixed with anticipation. Good, she replied. Change is how we grow. How we evolve. How we learn to see beyond our own limited perspectives. And as they stood together in the aftermath of crisis, both knew they had crossed a point of no return. Their worlds would never be the same, and neither would they. News of the incident at Research Station Helios spread through both human and Arcturus space with the speed of quantum transmission. Within days, the station had become the center of a diplomatic storm that threatened decades of careful relations between the two species. Nathaniel stood before the hastily assembled Joint Species Council, trying to maintain his composure as dozens of faces, both human and Arcturus, stared down at him from their elevated seats. The council chamber, normally reserved for trade negotiations and territorial disputes, now hummed with tension. Dr. Wade, began the Human Council chairwoman, your report suggests that humans and Arcturus share more than just compatible DNA. You're claiming a fundamental connection between our species that defies current scientific understanding. Do you realize the implications of such an assertion? Before he could respond, an Arcturus Council member's scales flashed with skepticism. And we are to believe this discovery was purely scientific in nature? The reports from Station Helios suggest your relationship with Director Venn has become inappropriate. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Nathaniel felt his face flush but stood his ground. With respect, Council members, the nature of my relationship with Director Venn only proves our point. The connection between our species isn't just theoretical, it's real, it's profound, and it's something neither of our societies can ignore any longer. The chamber doors opened, and Thera entered, her midnight blue scales gleaming under the harsh lights. She moved to stand beside Nathaniel, her presence giving him strength. Honorable Council, she addressed them, her translator projecting clear confidence. What happened on Helios wasn't just a scientific breakthrough or a planetary anomaly. It was a message, one written in the very fabric of our beings. Our species aren't meant to maintain artificial barriers between us. You speak of dissolving boundaries that have protected both our peoples for generations, another Arcturus counselor protested, their scales shifting in agitation. Already, we're receiving reports of other humans and Arcturus questioning our social protocols. There's talk of more, mixed relationships. Perhaps that's exactly what we need, came a new voice. Dr. Lyra Patel, Earth's leading xenoanthropologist, stood from her observer's seat. For too long, we've assumed that differences between species meant incompatibility. But look at our history, every major advancement in both our civilizations came from embracing change, not fearfully clinging to tradition. The chamber erupted in debate, but a sudden flash from the massive windows overlooking Kepler 186f silenced everyone. The planet's auroras had begun to dance again, but this time in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. Nathaniel and Thera exchanged knowing looks before he addressed the council again. What you're seeing isn't just an atmospheric phenomenon. The planet's quantum field is responding to concentrated thought patterns, specifically, to the combined neural resonance of humans and Arcturus in proximity. We're not just genetically compatible, our consciousness can literally affect the physical world when we work in harmony. To demonstrate, Thera raised her hand, her scales shifting through complex patterns. Nathaniel placed his hand against hers, and immediately, the auroras outside began to shift, forming beautiful, synchronized waves of light that left the council chamber in stunned silence. This is what we've discovered, Thera explained softly. Our species together can achieve things neither of us could alone. The universe itself responds to our unity. A younger Arcturus council member leaned forward, their scales showing genuine curiosity. The implications for space exploration, for terraforming, for understanding the fundamental nature of consciousness, are precisely why this discovery cannot be suppressed, Nathaniel finished. Yes, it challenges our preconceptions. Yes, it might cause social upheaval. But look at what we stand to gain. The human chairwoman studied them thoughtfully. And what of personal gains, Dr. Wade? Are we to understand that you and Director Venn intend to pursue your connection despite our society's conventions? Thera's scales shifted to that deep, passionate hue that Nathaniel had come to cherish. What exists between us isn't just emotion or physical attraction. It's proof that our species can connect on the deepest possible level. We're not asking permission to feel what we feel, we're asking you to recognize that such connections are natural, beneficial, and perhaps even essential to our future. Essential, an Arcturus elder scoffed. You believe human-Arcturus partnerships are necessary for our survival? Look at the evidence, Nathaniel urged, bringing up holographic displays of their research. The quantum resonance patterns we've discovered suggest both our species are incomplete on our own. We evolved separately but in complementary ways, as if we were always meant to find each other, Thera finished, her scales rippling with certainty. The crisis on Helios proved that together, we can achieve impossible things. Apart, we're vulnerable to forces we barely understand. The council chamber fell into contemplative silence, broken only by the soft hum of technology and the occasional whispered conversation. Outside, the auroras continued their mesmerizing dance, as if nature itself was waiting for humanity and the Arcturus to embrace their shared destiny. Finally, the chairwoman spoke again. What you're proposing would change everything, our social structures, our diplomatic protocols, our very understanding of ourselves as distinct species. Yes, Nathaniel agreed simply. And isn't it about time? He felt Thera's hand slip into his, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that would have been scandalous just days ago. Now, as the council watched them with mixed expressions of shock, curiosity, and grudging acceptance, it felt like the most natural thing in the universe. The auroras flared again, brighter this time, casting the chamber in otherworldly light. And in that moment, as human and Arcturus leaders witnessed the physical manifestation of what Nathaniel and Thera had discovered, the last walls of resistance began to crumble. The future they had glimpsed, one of unity, discovery, and love that transcended species, was no longer just a possibility. It was becoming reality, one shared heartbeat at a time. 1 year after their appearance before the Joint Species Council, Nathaniel and Thera stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned Unity Station, watching as the first graduating class of the Interspecies Science Academy filed into the Great Hall below. Young humans and Arcturus moved among each other with an easy familiarity that would have been unthinkable just months ago. Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed, Nathaniel said, adjusting the formal research robes that marked his position as the Academy's co-director. Remember when they wanted to shut us down? Thera's scales shimmered with amusement, the patterns now so familiar to him that he barely needed the translator. If by remember, you mean, still have nightmares about, then yes. She moved closer, her midnight blue scales complementing the deep blue of his ceremonial attire. Though I prefer to remember what came after. The memories flooded back. The weeks following their council appearance had been a whirlwind. Their research had sparked a revolution in both human and Arcturus society. The discovery that their species could achieve quantum resonance together had opened up entirely new fields of study. Space exploration, medicine, even the fundamental understanding of consciousness itself, everything had to be reconsidered in light of what they'd found. But more than that, they'd opened the door for others like them. Across human and Arcturus space, people who had felt inexplicable connections to the other species were finally free to explore those feelings. The first wave of officially sanctioned interspecies partnerships had followed, each one proving that what Nathaniel and Thura had discovered was no anomaly. Director Wade, Director Venn, the station's AI announced, "The ceremony will begin in 5 minutes." They made their way down to the Great Hall, where hundreds of graduates waited. The sight still took Nathaniel's breath away, humans and Arcturus sitting together, their combined neural frequencies causing subtle ripples in the quantum field that manifested as gentle auroras within the station itself. Distinguished graduates, Thura began, her translator unnecessary for many in the audience who had learned to understand Arcturus speech patterns. When Dr. Wade and I first discovered the quantum resonance between our species, we thought we had found a scientific breakthrough. What we actually found was a key to understanding not just our shared origins, but our shared destiny. Nathaniel stepped forward. Each of you represents what can happen when we stop seeing our differences as barriers and start seeing them as opportunities. The projects you've developed here prove that together, we are more than the sum of our parts. He gestured to the holographic displays showing the graduates' achievements. New medical treatments that combined human intuition with Arcturus precision. Spacecraft designs that utilized the neural interface capabilities of both species. Environmental restoration projects that tapped into their combined ability to influence quantum fields. But perhaps most importantly, Thura continued, her scales glowing with pride, you've shown that connection, real, deep connection between our species, isn't just possible. It's natural. Essential. The way forward. As if to emphasize her point, the quantum field rippled visibly around them, responding to the combined consciousness of everyone in the hall. No longer did such displays cause panic or concern. They had become a symbol of the harmony possible between their peoples. Today, you leave this academy as more than scientists, Nathaniel addressed the graduates. You are pioneers. The first generation to fully embrace what it means to be truly united, not just in research, but in understanding, in purpose, and yes, in love. He turned to Thura, taking her hand in a gesture that now felt as natural as breathing. Her scales shifted to that special pattern that only he could fully read, one that spoke of joy, love, and possibilities yet to be discovered. The council has approved our proposal, he announced to the gathered crowd. The Unity project will begin next month. For the first time, we will establish a permanent joint colony on Kepler 186f. A place where our species can live, work, and grow together without the artificial separations of the past. The hall erupted in excitement, the combined emotional response creating waves of color in the quantum field that rivaled the planet's natural auroras. Humans and Arcturus embraced, their joy transcending any remaining cultural barriers. But before we embark on this new chapter, Thura said, her voice carrying over the celebration, Dr. Wade and I have our own announcement. Nathaniel felt his heart race as she turned to face him fully, her star-bright eyes meeting his with an intensity that still made him catch his breath. The old laws have been changed, she said, switching off her translator so she could speak to him in her native tongue, which he now understood perfectly. We can finally make official what our hearts have known since that first night in Lab 7. The quantum field around them pulsed with their combined emotions as Nathaniel replied in flawless Arcturus speech, his hours of practice finally paying off. Then let us show both our peoples that love truly knows no boundaries. Their ceremony would be the first official human-Arcturus union, broadcast across both their worlds. But in that moment, as the quantum field danced around them and their graduates celebrated, none of that mattered. They had already proven what was possible when hearts and minds remained open to new possibilities. As they stood together, preparing to lead their peoples into a future neither could have imagined alone, the auroras of Kepler 186f blazed in celebration. The universe itself seemed to be applauding this new chapter in the evolution of both their species. And somewhere in the station's archives, in Lab 7, their original genetic samples still pulsed with a soft light, a quiet reminder that sometimes the greatest discoveries aren't just about science, they're about having the courage to follow your heart across the stars themselves.